Today, we're looking at something quite historical, actually. It's an article by Warren Weaver from 1948 called Science and Complexity. Alyssum pointed us to this, and it really makes you think about, well, what science is.
Absolutely. It's, what, nearly 80 years old now. But his perspective on science and the kinds of problems it tries to solve feels surprisingly relevant today.
Yeah, it really does. And the context is pretty key, isn't it? 1948, post-war optimism about science was huge.
Oh, definitely. Science had played such a major role.
And Weaver was right in the thick of it. He headed the applied mathematics panel during the war, and he was simultaneously working out the basics of information theory. So he wasn't just some outsider looking in.
No, far from it. He was shaping things. So his thoughts on where science was headed and what it fundamentally does when faced with hard problems carry real weight.
Exactly. So our goal today is to kind of explore Weaver's definition of science, especially through the lens of complexity. See if this historical view gives us any fresh takes on science now.
Sounds good. Let's get into the article itself. It was originally an American scientist, but got republished in ECO back in 2004. And that introduction rightly points out Weaver was a really influential figure.
Right. And he kicks off by observing something interesting. That science had already solved, I think he says, a bewildering number of relatively easy problems.
Yeah, that line definitely makes you pause. What did he consider easy back then?
Exactly. What were these easy problems for a mind like Weaver's?
Well, based on his argument, he seems to be talking mainly about problems involving relatively few variables, things that could be isolated.
Okay, so like classical physics kind of stuff?
Precisely. Think about mechanics, basic electricity, maybe simple chemistry. Situations where you could change one thing, see a direct predictable effect on another, and often capture it with a, fairly neat mathematical equation.
Right, where cause and effect seemed pretty clear, and you could boil it down to a formula.
That's the idea. Those were the big successes science had racked up. But Weaver saw that the next frontiers were different. He started distinguishing problems based on the number of variables involved.
Okay, so moving beyond the simple stuff, what were the other categories he saw?
So, after the simple few variable problems, he talked about disorganized complexity. This is where you have a massive number of variables, just countless.
Like molecules in a gas, that kind of thing.
Exactly his example. Billions and billions of molecules moving randomly. You can't possibly track each one individually.
So for those, you have to switch tactics, right? You use statistics, probability, look at the average behavior of the whole system.
Precisely. Statistical mechanics was the tool for that. You don't care about one molecule. You care about the overall temperature or pressure. It's about the aggregate.
Okay, got it. Simple problems, disorganized complexity. What was the third type?
The third type, and this is really central to his argument about the future of science, he called organized complexity.
Organized complexity. And this is where he thought the really big challenges, and maybe the definition of science itself, needed to evolve.
Yes, exactly. For Weaver, these problems involved a moderate number of variables, maybe dozens, hundreds, thousands. But crucially, these variables weren't acting independently or randomly. They were interconnected, interdependent.
So the relationships between the parts were the key thing.
That's it entirely. He was thinking about things like the intricate biochemistry within a living cell, or how different species interact in an ecosystem or even economic systems. You couldn't understand the whole just by looking at the pieces separately or just by averaging them out.
Because the way they influence each other creates behaviors that you wouldn't predict otherwise.
Exactly. The interactions define the system's behavior. It's not just the number of parts, it's the structure of their connections.
That sounds incredibly relevant today. I mean, think about climate modeling, neuroscience, understanding disease transmission.
Spot on. Those are prime examples of organized complexity. And Weaver's point was that the traditional scientific method, isolating one variable at a time, just wasn't sufficient for these kinds of problems.
So he was arguing that these hard problems, the ones that really mattered for humanity, were mostly problems of organized complexity.
Yes, and tackling them required science itself to change, to adapt its methods, and maybe even its definition of what constitutes a scientific approach.
Okay, so if the old science was good at isolation and simple equations, how did Weaver see science needing to change to grapple with this organized complexity? What was his prescription?
He predicted, really quite remarkably, two major shifts. First, he stressed the need for totally new kinds of collaborative arrangements among scientists.
Collaboration, meaning different types of scientists working together.
Exactly. He envisioned interdisciplinary teams. He literally said groups drawing members from essentially all sciences, because no single field had all the tools or perspectives needed for these complex interconnected problems.
That's really prescient, breaking down the silos between disciplines.
Absolutely. And his second big prediction was about computing power.
Ah, okay. He saw that coming.
He did. He recognized that understanding systems with many interacting parts, analyzing all the data, modeling the relationships that would require computational tools far beyond anything available in 1948, he basically foresaw the rise of computational science.
Wow. It's almost eerie how well he nailed it. Interdisciplinary research centers, massive computational modeling. That is how so much cutting-edge science works today.
It really is. He identified the essential ingredients needed for the toolkit of modern science dealing with complexity.
It makes you think about that déjà vu the introduction to the republished article mentioned. You know, the feeling that discussions about complexity science today are echoing what Weaver was saying way back then.
He does raise that question. Are some of the new ideas actually rediscoveries, or perhaps a deeper appreciation of insights that were already there?
Which leads directly to that other point from the introduction. If Weaver saw this so clearly almost 80 years ago, the nature of these complex problems, the need for collaboration, the need for computers, why aren't we even further along? Why do these problems still seem so, well, hard?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Perhaps the depth of the interconnectedness is just vastly greater than even Weaver imagined. Or maybe true, deep interdisciplinarity, getting different fields to genuinely integrate their thinking, not just work side by side,
Yeah.
is harder in practice than it sounds on paper.
Yeah, merging different languages and assumptions across fields is tough.
Definitely. And while computing power has exploded, maybe our theoretical frameworks, our ways of actually understanding what the complex models are telling us, haven't quite kept pace. It's probably a mix of all these things.
It really puts the challenge into perspective. We have the tools he foresaw, powerful computers, collaborative structures, but actually cracking the code of these deeply complex systems remains a massive undertaking.
It underscores that Weaver didn't just identify a type of problem. He pointed to a necessary evolution in the practice and, arguably, the philosophy of science itself. Embracing that complexity required, and still requires, ongoing adaptation.
So boiling it down, Weaver's article gives us a definition of science not as something fixed, but as something that has to evolve its methods to match the problems it faces, moving from simple, isolated systems to tangled, interconnected ones.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the limits of old approaches and developing new ones, collaboration, computation, maybe new theoretical insights too, to make progress on these organized complexity challenges. That's the evolving nature of the scientific endeavor he described.
This has been fascinating, really digging into how someone thought about the frontiers of science way back then and seeing how relevant it still feels.
It really is a testament to his foresight. He was thinking deeply about the fundamental nature of scientific inquiry and where it needed to go next.
Okay, so a final thought for everyone listening. Think about how Weaver's 1948 perspective on science tackling organized complexity connects with the big scientific questions you find compelling today. Are the collaborative computational approaches he foresaw being used effectively? And maybe what would Weaver say is the next big shift needed in how science approaches the even deeper complexities we're uncovering now? Something to chew on.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.